live broadcast now. Welcome to those attending this evening's Pensions Committee meeting and also to those watching live on Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Reeta Chamdal and I will be chairing this meeting. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible online underneath the live broadcast. At the end of the public part of the meeting, the committee will move to discuss any confidential matters. The live broadcast on YouTube will then be cut. Any members of the public present in the room will be asked to leave. For housekeeping, we are not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. Also, the polite reminder to please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. However, you may notice that some members are using their devices, and this is in lieu of any paper agendas. Online housekeeping. Some important online housekeeping for those attending via Microsoft Teams. Please ensure any mobile phones around you are on silent. Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking. Only one person may speak at a time, and I as chairman will call those to speak. Finally, remember to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if your microphone is switched on. Okay. So before we move on to part one of the agenda, I would just like to go around the room and if we can have some introductions from everybody, just for the YouTube viewers.
Councillor Douglas Mills.
Councillor Stuart Mathers.
Councillor Tony Burrows.
Marion George, the Independent Advisor.
Sylvia Martin from London CIV.
Martin Gloyn from London CIV.
Tony Noakes, Pension Board Member.
Roger Hackett, Pension Board Chair.
Richard Ennis, I'm the Council's Corporate Director of Finance.
Carl Pereira, Trainee Pension Fund Accountant.
Tunde Adeka, Pensions Fund Governance Manager.
Ryan Dale, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, and just a warm welcome to Councillor Douglas Mills, who replaces Councillor John Riley as part of a committee member. Okay, so, right, apologies for any absence?
We've received no apologies, but Councillor Banerjee is absent.
Okay. Any declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting?
I declare a non-pecuniary interest. I have members of the family who are on the pension scheme.
Thank you.
Can you clarify which item, or if it's all items that he's declaring an interest in?
Okay. Councillors, could you clarify if there's any items that you would be pertinent to your pecuniary interest?
No, I think it's just a general declaration. I don't believe anything specific that will have any major impact or beneficial untowards.
Thank you. Okay. The minutes of the previous meeting, are we agreed on those minutes? Any amendments? Agreed? Lovely. Okay. And just to confirm that items marked Part 1 will be considered in public and those marked Part 2 will be considered in private. So, Part 1, Agenda Item 5, Administration Report. And the recommendations that are for the Pensions Committee to note the administration report. So, over to you, Tunde.
Thank you, Chair. So, the administration report is just a synopsis of Hampshire's performance between October and December 2024. So, overall, they have been 100%, they've delivered 100% performance against set targets based on the KPIs agreed at the onboarding process. The highlights of this particular agenda item is the uptake in the portal signing overall of about 48%, previously from 46%. So, and the pensioners as well have been doing very well. We've got about 69% of pensioners sign up or opt out of the portal. So those who opt out will get paper notifications of all information they require. The other item of note is the cyber security, which is quite very important now. So an external penetration test was completed in December. 4 medium and 9 low vulnerabilities were identified, and they're all being addressed as we speak. So I'll give an update on those at the next meeting. And the last item of note will be MacLeod. So that the MacLeod eligibility tool has been processed, and they are getting towards finalizing who will benefit from it and how much it will impact anybody. So that's my... Oh, and lastly, the pensions dashboard. The pensions dashboard is the initiative by the schema, the government to centralize all pension pots for everybody. So each person will be able to see their state pension, all other private pensions, including the LGPS pensions, in one place. So the implementation, or the connection date is October 2025, and I think the final implementation is October 26, but we are on schedule to connect by 2025 October, being pioneered by Hampshire on our behalf. So, thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Councillor May.
Thank you, Chair. I know you said that with McLeod we'd have a proper estimate soon of the impact. Are we still expecting this to be negligible in terms of the cost of the fund in the scheme of things? I know that's a...
Sorry. Off the top of my head, I do not have the exact figure in terms of how much it will cost. But I know the actuaries have factored in, I think, about 1.4, 1.5 million into the cost of McLeod, into the valuation. So that is already taken, and that is a very generous estimation as well from the last time we spoke to the actuaries.
Any further questions? No? So is the committee happy to recommend note the administration update? Agreed? Yeah, lovely. Before I move on, sorry, apologies guys on the MNS, on the Microsoft Teams, I forgot to introduce Andy, Vicky and Andrew Singh from ISIO, so sincere apologies, because you're not in the room with me, the screen's behind me, I completely forgot, so welcome guys. Andy, do you have any questions? Do you want to add anything? Wonderful. Thank you, Andy, and thank you for everything that you are doing on the administration side. And I think you are okay to go for now.
Yeah, that's okay by you, Chair?
Yep, lovely. Thank you. Agenda item 6, the investment strategy and fund manager performance. And the recommendation are, again, that the committee note the funding and performance update. Over to you again, Tunde.
Thank you, Chair. So this particular agenda item is for committee to note the performance of the fund over the 3-month period, October to December 2024, and the attached performance quarterly executive summary produced by the SIV in conjunction with the officers shows the fund returned 2.6% over the quarter, even though it underperformed its benchmark by 0.5%. So effectively, the set benchmark returned 3.1%, whilst our fund returned 2.6%. We haven't lost any money, but based on what the market returned, we're a bit below par in terms of performance. And in terms of the asset, the funding perspective, the funding level is 128%. Ideally, we want 100%, but we're 28% above that, which means if at any point in time the assets are liquidated and everybody is paid off, we'll have an extra 28% to play around with. And the liabilities have gone up as well. So, but the liabilities are are still below what the assets are, and the other information are self-explanatory. So, for example, the total fund versus benchmark bar chart shows what we returned over 3 months and the benchmark as well. Then on 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. So, in a nutshell, since inception, which is since the records have started being recorded, we're marginally behind the benchmark, which is not too bad, 0.2%. Over 5 years, we're a bit behind on 1.5%, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that the required return rate for the fund to achieve what we want to do, I think, is currently 4.3 or 4.4%. So we are at where we want to be, but we could do better, which will improve our our funding position. So then there's another chart at the bottom which shows the manager contribution. So you can see what each fund manager has contributed to the 2.6 returns, and that's on page 26 if anyone is interested. So I'll hand over back to Chair on that.
Any questions? Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you allowing me to speak. There's a lot of noise around kind of volatility of equities, and we obviously have an increased equities allocation in our strategy. It'd be useful to get some reflections from yourself, Elsiv or Izio. And I just wondered, Chair, if we could just talk in part 2 about the absolute return fund and the performance management there, because that seems I know they're waiting for the golden goose, but it would be useful to understand kind of how Elsiv are working with the manager.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. At the last time I checked, I think we're about 5% overweight in equities, and the tolerance level is between plus or minus 10%. And this will be addressed maybe at a later date. I had a discussion with Marion, and I think Andrew will talk a little bit about that in part 2 as well, if required. But I think either Marion or Sylvia can give a bit of information in terms of the volatility in the equity markets recently. Sylvia.
Thank you. So what I would say is that equity markets they did really well up until the U.S. election, and they were very strong. And then after that, the U.S. market in particular has been going very much sideways. But what is driving that is that around Christmas time, there was an announcement about DeepSeek that it was very much in the headlines. And it's a competition for the majority of those companies that are engaging with AI in the U.S. and using those chips from NVIDIA. So these companies combined, they have contributed to the majority of the positive performance of the U.S. equity market over the last 12 months. And they have contributed in a very, very large extent, in a way that if you think about the S&P 500 index, that is the index, these 10 companies were making up about 30% of the index. So it's very concentrated. So when they had like a big sell-off, the markets went sideways. But interesting enough, I saw some literature that up until mid-March, while the MSCI US was kind of down 9% year to date up until mid-March, The MSCI Europe was up equally 9%. So you have a very big proportion of your global equity markets attributed to the U.S. market. But there are other areas within the market that are becoming more resilient and are becoming better. And this is very good for active managers. So your Bailey Gifford or the Wellington that manages your equity value fund. So they are able to be more discriminatory and contribute better in times like that. But, it is true that some of the returns are very volatile, and it's primarily the whole uncertainty around the narrative that we see from the U.S. administration is really picking up the mood in markets. But maybe Marianne wants to make any other comments for now?
Sorry. Andrew might have some comments, but I was going to say in terms of equities, I probably wouldn't say a lot more. Clearly, what's driving some of the economic data is the sort of continued pronouncements from President Trump around tariffs and the potential effects that might have on global trade and global inflation. And then there's a consequential effect on short-term interest rates. So we've seen the Fed pause and the Bank of England pause, and there's been today, I believe. Well, I've been travelling, so I haven't seen all the detail of the Chancellor's announcements, but I think the inflation came in a little bit lower today. But I think the OBR's predictions in the UK for growth have been scaled back. I don't know whether Andrew's a bit more up to date on that than me. So I think it's a very volatile time. But what I would say is, remember, the pension fund is a long-term investor. So the real key thing is to make sure that, and as we'll talk about it later in part 2 about the timetable for the strategy review, but it's just to remember we are long-term investors, and getting your asset allocation right is a really important thing. So, Andrew, did you want to comment?
Couple of comments. So I agree with all that, and I think the volatility, it's completely right to say the volatility is being driven by kind of sound bites from President Trump, but also the kind of sensitivity of the tech stocks in the US. So the US market, and within that, tech is driving a lot of that volatility. And it has been volatile. There's been quite a significant sell-off, but actually markets don't look too bad now compared to the start of the year. So they're down slightly in the US, but not by a huge amount. And then with Marianne's point about a long-term investor, I agree with that. So if you look at the overall equity allocation for the Hillingdon Fund, it's about middle of the range for LGPS allocation. So some have slightly higher at 60-70%, some have slightly kind of 35-40%. So it's a big allocation within the strategy, but not the biggest within the LGPS. So there's some comfort there. And then in terms of the managers, so Bailey Gifford have a very kind of defined growth style that struggled for the past couple of years, but the last 2, 3, 4 months we've seen that come back quite well. So the Bailey Gifford performance has started to recover and recover some of that underperformance, which is good news. And then adding this value mandate should help lower that volatility. So value and growth styles tend to perform well in different environments, so that should make the return profile more stable over time. And that's what you want from a long-term investment portfolio, is that kind of range of styles to help manage that volatility.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Okay, Councillor Mellors, I have noted Bailey Gifford, because we were discussing that too, that we will go into more detail in part 2, and then we'll go into more detail about the American markets as well. Roger.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a look at MSCI World this afternoon, and it's classic. We've come down from the high, we've turned, we're beginning to go up again, but we're about a third of the way back up to to the high. So I think the question is, are we going to see a V or are we going to see a W? I think, like you, it very much depends upon whether Mr. Trump keeps his mouth shut or not, basically. But I think it's interesting because obviously it will have had an effect upon the funding level, and perhaps in part two we can chat a bit more about that and the implications for both the fund and the employer.
Okay, so is the committee happy to note the funding and performance update? Agreed? Okay, agenda item 7, which is a responsible investment update, and it's recommended that the Pensions Committee note the fund manager's ESG activities and compliance efforts, and note that London Civ and LAPF activities.
Thank you, Chair. So, agenda item 7, it's an overall summary of how our fund managers have, in line with our instructions, been able to implement their our beliefs in responsible investment. As a responsible investor, we're concerned about the effects of emissions in the environment and the governance of companies we're invested in as well. So this agenda item just gives an overall view of how the managers have been active over the last 3 months, in the quarter under review. So as you can see from the table, LGIM, who are the passive manager, have been really very, very active. So they attended over 2,000 meetings and voted on almost 13,000 resolutions. So the stats are there. And further to that, I've picked out one or two, about 3 engagement focuses for legal and general. And the reason we focus on legal and general is because of their outreach and the resources available to them. Likewise, in the reports on the shared drive, the London CIV, in conjunction with ELS as well, have been very active in engagement. So the London CIV engaged with 195 companies on various issues, including human capital, board effectiveness, and climate change. So this is just to show members of the committee that in line with our beliefs and policy on responsible investment, the fund managers are actively representing us, and there are enough examples within this report to show how they are doing.
Any questions? Councillor Bell.
Maybe for part 2 again, but maybe we can discuss the decisions that were made a couple of months ago by the large oil companies to go back to oil-based development, etc., like Shell and BP made, and perhaps we can discuss in part 2 again how it's affected our thinking, etc., or the thinking of the markets.
Any further questions? So is the committee happy to note the fund manager's ESG activities and compliance efforts, and note London Civ and LAP activities? Agreed? Okay. Agenda item 8, Pension Risk Register, and it's recommended that the Pensions Committee approve the revised risk register, consider and agree the risk register in terms of the approach, the specific risks identified, the measures being taken to mitigate those current risks, and note the revised format agreeing the retired risks and those which remain open. Tunde.
Thank you, Chair. So I've brought the risk management policy of the pension fund back to committee today for approval. Bear in mind the last one was approved in September 2024, but we've had an incident in the last 3 months of a pensioner calling Hampshire up for information over the phone. So one of his argument was the fact that it wasn't clearly spelled out in our communication. Sorry, I think I'm going on to the wrong one. Sorry, I'm sorry about this. This is a completely new policy. My apologies. I'm mixing this up with the communication policy coming up later on. This is a completely new policy which we haven't had in the past, but in line with the General Code of Practice, which comes into effect in September 2025. This will give us, this will be one of the feathers in our cap in complying with the pensions regulator demands. So that's why
did we draft this with Marion? Did you have an input into this one, or
no, it's mine. I think sorry, my apologies in this. This is a revised risk management policy. So the last one was in 2019. So it's 2022. It's due for renewal every 3 years. So that's why it's been brought to committee. I do apologize for the mix-up there. So this is just for committee to again look at the revised policy and approve for publication. My apologies for the mix-up.
fine, Tunde? There's nothing major changed on there, Tunde, I think, from our discussions.
No,
was there?
no. And the other item on this is the risk register. So the risk register allows us to actively monitor all the risks inherent in the management of the pension fund. So as detailed in here, the risks are separated into two different areas. Closed risks, so those are the risks that we are tolerating and are static, and they do not need to be actively sort of monitored. But the most important ones are the open risks. So we have 6 of them which we actively monitor because they are very, very integral to how the pension fund is run. So one of them has been sort of upgraded recently, PENS 11, because of the recent consultation on Fit for the Future, because it puts a bit more onus on London CIV in being able to provide certain services which we are not sure the capacity is readily available right now, and so that has been upgraded just so that and is now an open risk which will be monitored closely until we get the feedback from the consultation and the plan from the London CIV as well in terms of how to comply with the regulations if it's made into law. So I just need committee to, one, approve the revised risk management policy, and then note the risk register. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I think in part 2, Sylvia will talk about London CIV's contribution in more detail. Any questions? Councillor Mathers.
Just if I may, a brief comment. So, and I suppose it's good for clarity, PEN 11 around the pool is not about the pool in any way, any concerns about the pool in its current state compared to others. It's just the fact that the policy has taken such a jump that we just need to be mindful of that. And I think that's worth saying, because I think we've got quite a good relationship and a good communication exchange with LCIV. So I wouldn't want it to ever be misconstrued that we had concerns about the pool. It's just how ready are you going to be for who knows what when it lands on the table. And I think I'm sure that's something that CIV takes very seriously. And I'm sure we're one of 32 or 33 who are looking quite closely at how the SIV responds.
Absolutely, Councillor Mays. I think we've hit the nail on the head. I think that's why we're going to discuss it in part 2 in a bit more detail. But that's just alluding to the fact that we have an open risk because of the forthcoming changes. Sylvia?
I don't have much to comment now, but all I can briefly say is that I want to make sure you're all aware that we are doing a lot of work behind the scenes to come up with a credible plan that can be implemented. So we can discuss more in detail, but the SIV is actively looking to deliver on a fit for future request from the government.
Any more questions? No. So committee is happy to approve the revised risk register. We're happy to agree the risk register in terms of the approach and that the revised format agreeing the retired risks and those which remain open. Agreed? Perfect. Lovely. Right. Agenda item 9, the annual report of the Local Pensions Board. Over to you, Roger.
Thank you very much, Chair. This report covers the period from January to December of 2024. In January 2024, I was privileged to be elected to serve a third term as the Chair of the Pensions Board for the calendar year 2024. The Board met on 4 occasions during that time. These were all face-to-face meetings. We've now are having a regular presentation from Hampshire Pension Services at our board meetings. Like this meeting, they attend virtually. This provides an extra layer of governance, allowing the board to directly scrutinise and monitor the partnership working between Hampshire and ourselves. The key achievements of the board in 2024 are set out in the start of the report, and obviously one of the things we do, in addition to looking at various current issues, we also go through and review the Pensions Committee reports as well. We invite members of the Pensions Committee to attend our meetings and are always very pleased to see yourselves. The Chair was able to come to our last meeting. I hope it was a productive meeting. In the year ahead, there's a number of governance and compliance challenges and uncertainties. These include ensuring compliance with the General Code of Practice, as Tunde has mentioned a couple of times. Obviously, as part of the government's reforms, there's what's left of what was called the good governance framework, and now to a large extent that's been taken on by the government in their current pensions reforms. We've got the Pensions Dashboard Programme, where Hampshire have been at the forefront of working on this particular programme. We're in a very good position, I think, compared to many other funds here. Obviously, data improvement, continuously we're wanting to get our data more accurate. The work that's being done by officers is set out, for example, in the the report that was part of item 5. We'll also be keeping cyber security under review. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it's some time since we had a really good look at that. It's due for review again, and I think the new policy that's later in the agenda will be very helpful with that. And of course, like yourselves, we'll be waiting to see the outcome of the government's reviews and how LSIV react to those. A very helpful document recently setting out your response to the government. I thought that was very interesting, and no doubt we'll be discussing it more in part 2. So I'd like to thank the Pensions Committee, officers, advisors, fellow board members for their cooperation and support during 2024, and also I hope your continued support during 2025 as I'm chair of the board for this year as well. So thank you very much indeed to everybody. Any questions?
Any questions? No.
It was more of a comment really that you'll notice in section 7 on training the revised way of presenting training for the board, and I would suggest it might be a good idea to start thinking like that for the pensions committee. It just raises the profile a little bit, especially as it's almost certainly going to be compulsory under the Fit for the Future consultation.
Thank you, Marion. I think Tunde and I will be discussing the training, which will come up later on as well anyway, isn't it? Yeah. But no, valid point, thank you. And congratulations on being chair again for another year, Roger. Thank you very much. Okay, so the committee happy to note the annual report of the local pension board for the year 2024. Perfect. Okay, on to agenda item 10, governance. And we've got 6 recommendations here. So we note the dates of the pension committee meetings, note committee work and training plans, and note the committee's continued CPD, approved the draft quality diversity inclusion policy, EDI, approved revised communication strategy, and approved revised pension board operating procedures. So I think over to you, Tunde, to start off with.
Thank you, Chair. So this agenda item is a bit, it has more items than normal today, but the committee work plan is just set out to show what what committee will be going through in the next 4 quarters in terms of what they will be focusing on, and that is on from page 86, no, 85. It shows the training plan from page 85 onwards. So each quarter there are agenda items to focus on, and training plans as well incorporated into that. So that's that part of the agenda items. Then the continuous development of the members is captured on page 82. And I need to apologize. There has been an omission of Councillor Mather's attendance at the LAPFF conference from the 4th to the 6th of December. So that should count roughly about 21 extra hours or more towards that. So that will be rectified in the next iteration of this. So then we come to item number 4 on this agenda, which is the EDI policy. Again, this is a new one, which will count towards being compliant with the new General Code of Practice coming into effect in September 2025. And before we go into this policy, I think we've arranged for Vicky Trott, a member of the pension board, and the Equality and Wellbeing Manager for Hillingdon, to deliver a very quick, short training on what EDI stands for and the relevance of the policy to the work of this committee, the board, and the and members of the pension fund in general. So, Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Tunde. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Lovely, thank you. So what I will do is I will share the slides, and hopefully you'll be able to see those. So just bear with me 1 second. So can you let me know that you can see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you, Tunde, for the introduction. So my name is Vicky Trott. I'm a scheme member representative for the fund, but with my other hat, I'm responsible for equality, diversity and inclusion and staff wellbeing for the London Borough of Hillingdon. and I was asked to prepare this briefing for the committee, which I have also presented to the board. And this briefing is to support the introduction of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion policy. So I will be talking about how we define equality, diversity and inclusion, and to understand how this relates to the role of the Pensions Committee and its representatives. So it's really important, folks, that we understand the differences between these different terms. You may well have heard a lot of conversation in recent months around these kind of topics, but it's really important that we understand what these terms mean and how they relate to the functions of the fund, the committee and the board. So what I'd like to do first of all is just go through some of those definitions. So the first one is diversity, and ultimately what we're talking about here is human difference. It's what makes us who we are. So there are some primary characteristics which would be our sex, our sexual orientation, our religion or belief, our ethnicity, if we have a disability, and then there's other secondary characteristics such as our education, our work status, where we live, those types of things. So it's about ultimately acknowledging that as human beings, even though we might share some characteristics, we are all different. Equality is about treating people equally, so ensuring that people have equal opportunity, equal access, whether that's to employment, to training, to promotion, and so that we treat everybody equally. But that doesn't necessarily mean by treating everybody equally that we necessarily treat everybody equitably, i.e. that we treat some people fairly. So equity, which is a slightly different word, is around understanding that as we are all different, that equity is treating people according to those individual needs. So that you may have men and women in the room, but if I treat everybody equally, I may actually be treating the men unfairly in the room. So I need to make sure that I consider everybody's needs. And inclusion is the concept of including or being included. And often what we can do without realising is exclude people. So this is about consciously thinking about how we do things and making sure that we do not exclude people in the way that we do things. Does anybody have any questions on that at all before I move on? No? Okay. So I think that images and graphics can be really helpful to try and understand and sort of explain what we mean by some of these terms. And just to point out as well that the language that we use is always evolving, and it's important to understand that as well. So if we have a look at the top left-hand side here, the picture, we see the picture of a tree. We see on the left-hand side there are lots of apples growing on the tree, and that the individual has access to those apples. But on the other side we can see that the individual does not have any access to the apples, and in fact there are not a lot of apples growing on the side of the tree because it's favouring the other side to the left. So equality is saying, actually, if we give both sides the same ladder, I'm treating both sides absolutely fairly, then actually we are being fair. However, just because we're giving somebody the same ladder each side, the right-hand side is still unable to access the apples. So equity is saying, okay, well, let's actually treat the right-hand side according to their need and give them a taller ladder. What that means is that both sides can now access the fruit. However, justice is looking at the systems and the institutional and systemic issues that we might have to ensure that we prop the tree up so that the fruit on the tree grows equally, and therefore everybody has access to the fruit and the fruit is growing in abundance. So I hope that helps to explain in pictorially some of those words and that terminology. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, so another image that I hope will help to explain again what we mean by the difference between equality and equity. So equality is saying that I'm going to give you all the same bike because I'm being fair, I'm treating everybody equally, and I will give you all the same bicycle to ride. However, if you look at the 4 individuals in that image, they all have different needs. So equity is about providing each person with the bicycle that meets their individual needs. So why does it matter? Why is it important? Why is it relevant to the committee? So as Tunde has already mentioned, the pensions regulator requires the fund to have an equality, diversity and inclusion policy, which is I have worked with Tunde to produce, and this has gone to the board for their consideration and feedback. It's relevant to scheme members. Are there some members or some people who are not accessing the fund, who are not members? Are there some of our members, is there, for example, maybe a pay gap between male and female members of the scheme? So if we understand the makeup of our scheme members and we apply some of these principles, then we may be able to understand the demographics of people who are not part of the scheme. The Equality Act 2010 is an act of Parliament that places duties specifically on public sector organisations, but also it is unlawful to discriminate against people on the grounds of protected characteristics. The other thing is around diversity of thought. So research shows that the more diverse people that you have in a room or on a committee or on a board, that actually is beneficial to that group, because you may have people who may bring different perspectives, different views, different opinions, and that's actually a positive thing. So the more diverse people you have, the better. Improve communications. So understanding different people's needs and their communication styles and methods that they require, we can improve our communication and also ultimately, hopefully, increase membership. Any questions on that so far? And then lastly, what does this actually mean for the committee? So the local government pension scheme checklist outlines some key things that we need to do. So having an EDI strategy, looking at how we communicate with scheme members, looking at the representation of officers and the host authority members of staff, looking at the membership and effectiveness of the committee and the board and how representative they are, looking at the investment approach, the benefits and calculations, and then monitoring and reporting on all of these things. And the action plan that you see at the end of the strategy reflects the actions that we need to take to implement that checklist. So that is the end of the briefing. So does anybody have any questions for me?
No? No. Thank you very much, Vicky. That was really informative.
Okay, pleasure.
Roger?
Yeah, can I just thank Vicky very much, because we've been involved in the work that Vicky's been doing. Thank you very much for all the work that you've done. I think it's really helpful that the policy we've got here is clearly integrated with the corporate policy. I think it's also very helpful the action plan down there that we've got is a very practical action plan, which means that we should be focusing on, what are the issues for our particular scheme, because LGPS schemes vary enormously, and I think it's really helpful that you've been able to take what were, rather, to my mind, that there was a lack of clarity in what the pension regulator had set out. I think the work you've done makes it a lot more understandable and a lot clearer as to the direction that we should be taking. So thank you very much, Ricky.
Thank you, Roger.
Tunde, anything else you wish to add?
No, nothing. Just for committee to consider the draft policy and approve that. The next item is the revised communication strategy, which I inadvertently started earlier on. So this has been brought back to committee. The last strategy was approved in September 2024, but a pensioner rang up Hampshire requesting information over the phone, and which they refused to provide as per the strategy and their policy as well. So his claim was that it wasn't clearly spelled out in the communication policy that we will not be providing information over the phone. So I've made a slight amendment to the policy itself, and just to be quite concise and clear that no information will be provided over the phone, and this is on page 108. So what we've done is added a line to emphasize that however, specific pension figures and sensitive information will not be provided by telephone in order to cover ourselves from future allegations of discrimination, which is what we've been accused of on the basis of his age. So that is why this policy has been brought back to Pensions Committee. So if it's agreeable with committee, please kindly approve this for publication.
Councillor Method.
Can I just ask a question so we don't dig ourselves into holes? So yes, it's spelled out that the information can't be provided on the telephone. Do we need to state that in the majority we've stated how it's normally provided, but do we need to state something along the lines of that accessible documents would be available, or accessible ways of getting this information are available as per the policy as part of that? I wouldn't want us to get caught, and I'm sure this has been looked at, of discriminating inadvertently against someone because we weren't able to provide, someone who would normally get it verbally won't be able to provide it in an accessible manner due to vision or blindness.
Part of the communication policy itself and Hampshire's policy as well is the ability to provide information to people in various ways depending on their needs. Braille, large print, if you want to pay, if somebody needs paper version of whatever information. But in this case, we're quite specific in terms of not being able to verify who is over the phone. I mean, we've had cases of elderly people whose information have been sort of compromised and being used by people over the phone. You can't see who's on the other side of the telephone. So that's why specific pensions information, especially financial information, is not provided to anyone over the phone. But I think I'll go through that with Hampshire as well, and just confirm that there's provision for being able to provide information in various ways, and if necessary, maybe amend this further to include what Councillor Mathers has just suggested.
Councillor Mathers.
Yeah, I won't labour the point. I can see it's in the EDI, but I don't know if that fully covers us. I don't know if we can get someone to have a look. There's a paragraph saying that the pension funds information can be provided in alternative formats. I wouldn't want someone to argue that the only alternative format is telephone, and we've ruled that out through this. But I understand completely that for security and for people's personal information, it's best, and the approach is best that it's not done over the telephone. I would just want to make sure that this policy either referenced back or was robust, so that there wasn't any issues in that regard.
Okay. So, any other?
Vicky's got a question.
Vicky?
It was just to say that I'd be more than happy to have a review of that communications policy from an equality perspective, if that would be helpful to the committee.
Yes. Any input, because we're not going to agree this one tonight. So yes, please, Vicky, that would be helpful. Tunde?
Yes, so I'll liaise with Vicky and she can review the policy, and I'll bring it back at the next committee meeting for approval.
Marion?
I was just going to say, I think it may be there, because at the top of page 107, there's a bit on ethnic diversity and inclusion where it says, Braille, large print, and then underneath, about methods of communication, it says, we recognise it's not suitable for all stakeholders, and where appropriate we'll provide communication in writing, so I think that covers it.
I simply don't know if it does or doesn't. I agree with you. It seems like it does. I would be quite happy for you, Chair, if you were willing to just say that we can seek advice on this and defer it, but in principle agree it. I just wouldn't want us to contradict within the policy. But it looks like it's covered, and I would be happy to agree it on that basis. But if it can get a double check, and any changes can be delegated to officers, I think that's appropriate, if allowed.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll go through that and then just confirm back once you've had a chat with Vicky as well, and then made the adjustments. So all we will do at the next meeting is just confirm the adjustments that we've been made, so we don't have to go through the whole policy. So are we happy to, for the recommendations, note the dates of the pension committee meetings, note the committee work and training plans, note the
Right, so the last item on this agenda 10 is the revised pension board operating procedures. So in conjunction with Roger, we had a quick discussion about the running of the pension fund. So Roger, as the chair, is the only one who actually directs the board or conducts the affairs of the board on the day of meetings. So his suggestion was for us to amend the procedures and appoint a vice chair who, in his absence, will be able to carry out the necessary duties of the chair in his absence. So, to that effect, the operating procedures is being amended, and in terms of specifics, sorry, bear with me 1 second.
So much easier with paper.
So in terms of specifics, page 115, we've made amendment to the reference to the Pensions Regulator General Code of Practice. Then on page 116, the membership of the board is changed as well since the last operating procedures were produced. So it's now 3 employer representatives and 3 scheme members rather than 2. So then on the biggest changes are on page 118, the appointment of the pensions board chair and vice. So their duties are clearly spelled out there. These were missing from the previous version of it, and that spills over into page 119. So those are the notable changes, and that's why this has been brought before Pensions Committee for approval today. And Roger has kindly looked through the new procedures and is in agreement with the publication, if approved by committee today. Thank you, Chair.
Question, Roger, just quickly then, so the appointment of the Vice Chair, that will be done through your...
That will be done through the committee chair. I think just wanted to add that We're very aware of the needs to ensure succession planning, and by having a vice chair, it's a way of trying to make sure that we have other members of the board in a position to gradually step up and to become the chair in the future.
And will you be appointing the vice chair at the next meeting, or?
Yeah.
Yes, we hopefully will be appointing a vice chair to assist Roger at the next meeting.
Okay.
Which is in April.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm scheduled to attend that one, so if I have availability, I will do. Okay. Fine. Are we all done then, Tunde?
Yes, Chair. Thanks.
So, coming back, I think we'd agreed points 1 and 2. Just on the committee CPD, if you do attend a lot of any of the 1 hour sessions that we have with Civ or ECO or anybody else, just let Tunde know so we can update it. And Tunde, will you arrange for Councillor Mills to have the Aon training?
Yes, I will send the necessary documents and links to Councillor Mills tomorrow.
So we're happy to approve the draft Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Policy EDI, and we've had the training. We're going to hold fire for the approved revised communication strategy, although theoretically, in principle, yes, we've agreed it, but we would just like clarification on the telephone calls, and that will be brought back to the next meeting. And then we're happy to approve the revised pension board operating procedures. All agreed?
Chair, just for information, I suppose I am disappointed at having been appointed in November. It's not until the 27th of March that I'm going to get the invite. And I just think the officers should make a note of that, and the corporate director make a note of that length of time and failure of officers to actually communicate with a new member.
Richard?
Yeah, no, I mean, it shouldn't take that long to happen, Chair, so we'll make sure we reflect on that, and my apologies for that position. It shouldn't be the case, really. We'll make sure we get better. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's noted, Councillor Mills. Thank you. Okay, so that then brings us to the end of part 1 agenda item. So we've now finished the public part of the meeting. The committee will shortly move into private session to discuss matters that are confidential in nature. The YouTube broadcast will come to an end, and we kindly ask any members of the public present to leave the room. And I thank everybody for attending and those watching online.